What if I told you that the next 2 to 4 years could completely reshape the world order? Not because of politics, not because of economics, but because multiple groups with completely different agendas may be pushing toward the exact same outcome. Think about it. What if a wider Middle East war triggers events that lead to military drafts, civil unrest in America, the collapse of old alliances, the rise of new powers, and a world that looks nothing like the one you live in today? Sounds impossible? Well, when you connect the dots, some people believe the signs are already there. And whether these predictions turn out to be right or spectacularly wrong, the logic behind them is something worth understanding. Because if even half of these forecasts come true, the next 4 years could be among the most consequential of the 21st century. So where do predictions like this actually come from? Most analysts look at economics, others look at military strategy, some focus on elections and party politics. But there's another lens, one rarely discussed in mainstream conversation, and it might explain more than all the others combined. It's a lens that tries to answer a strange question. Why do nations, again and again, make decisions that look irrational, costly, even self-destructive? The answer may not be strategy at all. It may be story. Here's the idea. What if world leaders, movements, and entire populations aren't only acting on strategic interest? What if they're also acting on deeply held beliefs about how history is supposed to end? Every culture you've ever belonged to has carried some version of an ending. A final chapter, a last battle, a return, a collapse, a renewal. Historian and author Yuval Noah Harari has argued that large groups of humans don't cooperate because of treaties or armies alone. They cooperate because they share a story, a myth everyone agrees to believe in, even if no one can prove it. Money is a shared story. Nations are shared stories. And so, it turns out, is the end of the world. Now ask yourself this. What happens when several groups, who disagree on almost everything else, start moving toward the same ending? That's the pattern researchers and analysts have started to notice. Different belief systems, different religions, different ideologies, different goals, but strangely similar expectations about what comes next. A regional war, a reordering of global power, a moment when the old alliances break and something new rises in their place. You don't have to believe any of these stories are true to see why this matters. Because belief, even unproven belief, moves real people to take real action. In 1956, a psychologist named Leon Festinger published a study that quietly changed how researchers understand belief itself. He and his colleagues had infiltrated a small group convinced the world was about to end on a specific date. The date came. Nothing happened. But here's the strange part. The group didn't abandon their belief. They became more convinced, not less. And many doubled down harder than before. Festinger called this cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding a belief that reality has just contradicted, and the surprising lengths people go to resolve that discomfort without ever giving up the belief. Why does that matter for geopolitics? Because the same psychological pattern shows up again and again in political and religious movements that expect history to end a certain way. When predictions fail, the belief rarely dies. It adapts, it reschedules, and it often grows stronger. Now scale that pattern up. Instead of one small group, imagine entire populations, political movements, and even policymakers, shaped by some version of this thinking. Some expect a specific regional conflict to be the spark. Some expect a specific alliance to fracture. Some expect a specific power to rise as the old order falls. And, according to this theory, the Middle East sits at the center of nearly all of them. Here's where the first prediction comes in. If this theory holds, the United States eventually has no real choice but to become more directly involved in a wider regional conflict. Not necessarily by deliberate plan, sometimes by escalation no one fully controls. A strike here, a retaliation there, an ally pulled in, a treaty obligation triggered. Political scientist John Mearsheimer, known for his work on great power competition, has long argued that nations get drawn into conflicts less through grand design, and more through a chain of decisions each one believes is forced upon it. Layer belief-driven expectation on top of that kind of strategic momentum, and you get something dangerous. You get a scenario where multiple sides feel like the war isn't a choice, they feel like it's destiny. And once a government commits troops or weapons at scale, history shows what tends to follow. Pressure on resources, pressure on alliances, and in some predicted versions of this scenario, pressure that eventually reaches the home front, in the form of strained budgets, divided public opinion, and a population asked to sacrifice more than it expected. This is where the predictions start reaching beyond foreign policy and into everyday life. Drafts, civil unrest, a test of whether old alliances, built for a different century, still hold weight in this one. Some forecasters argue NATO itself gets reshaped, not necessarily destroyed, but renegotiated under pressure, as member states question what they actually owe each other when the cost of involvement rises. Others point to Russia and Turkey as the powers most likely to maneuver into the gaps any Western hesitation creates. None of this is guaranteed. None of it is certain. But notice something important. You don't need everyone to believe the same prophecy for the predicted outcome to start looking similar. You just need enough different groups, with enough different motivations, all expecting some version of upheaval, and all acting just enough to make their own expectation a little more likely. That's the part that should make you pause. Belief doesn't need to be true to be powerful. It just needs enough people moving in the same direction at the same time. This is the same mechanism anthropologists have observed in collapse and renewal myths across nearly every ancient civilization you've ever studied. A society senses decline. It searches for meaning in that decline. It tells itself a story about why the old world must end before a better one can begin. And then, sometimes, people act in ways that help bring that story to life, not because the prophecy was accurate, but because enough people behaved as if it was. So here's the real question this video leaves you with. Are these predictions about the next 2 to 4 years a roadmap of what will actually happen? Or are they a mirror, showing you how much human history has always been shaped less by pure strategy and more by the endings people expect to see? You don't have to accept any specific forecast about Iran, Israel, Russia, or NATO to take something useful from this. What you can take is this. Watch not just what nations do. Watch what they believe is coming. Because throughout history, the belief usually arrives first, the events follow after. And whether these predictions turn out to be right or spectacularly wrong, the real lesson was never about the next 4 years at all. It was about understanding that the world order has never been reshaped by politics or economics alone. It has always been reshaped by the stories enough people were willing to believe. If you like the video, please like and subscribe to our channel Mix Alone.